We're speaking today about the economic and financial problems in Spain with Mauro Guillen, management professor at Wharton and also director of the Lauder Institute of International Studies. Welcome.
Good morning, Steve.
Happy to have you with us today. Sovereign debt is big in the news these days, particularly with Greece. But Spain is actually perhaps a bigger challenge for Europe because its economy is 4 times the size of Greece. Could you tell us about the problems in Spain and how they've developed?
Well, as far as sovereign debt is concerned, it is true that Spain is a much bigger economy. It's one of the largest 9 or 10 economies in the world. However, the debt burden right now is not as big as that of Greece or Italy or even the UK. It's actually about the same level compared to the size of the economy as in Germany. The problem, of course, looking towards the future is that it is growing fast because of high unemployment. But it still is at manageable levels, and that is, I think, reflected in the fact that the country continues to get a AAA rating from the agencies.
Well, it's interesting that Spain is actually in pretty good shape based on what you've just said, but there's a lot of concern that its debt's going to go up. Now, in the case of Greece, it was a little bit more of a typical case where most observers see that as a case of government overspending. But Spain's actually been very good in managing its debt, and actually I think ran surpluses for 4 or 5 years leading up to the financial crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so they were in part a victim, weren't they, of
well,
circumstances?
Absolutely. This is not to minimize the problems that beset the country. I mean, the problems are serious. I don't think the debt problem is as urgent as some of the other problems. And of course, everything is interrelated. So I did not mean to minimize the difficulties lying ahead. But I don't think the debt itself is a big problem. Now, of course, comparisons with Greece are easy to make, but at the same time are difficult to justify, because Greece is a relatively small economy. It's not very competitive. It has been basically, propped up by the rest of Europe. Greece is not a country that contains a lot of companies that are internationally, competitive. Or that have a global presence. So it is a very, very peculiar case. Now, having said that, it is one of the member countries of the Euro system. And as such, then, anything that goes wrong with any of the members of the Euro undermines the credibility of the entire scheme.
And some people might say that Greece was kind of the can opener that opened up the problem, but when you look inside, it's the bigger economies like Spain that present the challenge, regardless of how they got into the problem.
Sure, and not only Spain, also I think Italy is a very big issue. So the euro just turned 10 years old, and of course the problem with the euro is like with any currency area that is created with multiple governments pursuing different kinds of policies, is that you need some measure of coordination. You need some system in place for dealing with situations such as the one that we find ourselves in right now. And that was probably the, a mistake that was made 10 years ago, not to put in place this mechanism so that now when we have this crisis. Now, having said that, I think the euro has been pretty much a success, and I think the fact that a lot of countries around the world hold an important percentage of their reserves, ranging from 20 to 30% in euros, is, I think, a very, very strong message indicating that there are people out there who actually like the euro, and they've been diversifying a little bit of their dollar reserves, and putting them into euros over the last 5 or 7 years. So I think that is a signal that from the markets and from the reserve holders around the world that the euro actually is a viable currency. It's just that there are some problems with it. But there are also problems with the dollars, there are problems with the sterling, there are problems with all of the other currencies that are used for holding reserves.
Let's come back to that idea of the mechanism a little bit later, but I wanted to ask you about how Spain's unique problems developed. It seems as though a real estate bubble developed, and as real estate prices increased, a lot of money came pouring in from outside of Spain, particularly from Germany, and that increased prices even further, which created the bubble, and then, of course, the world financial crisis led to a collapse of housing bubbles in many countries. Spain was just one that had a housing bubble problem. So where do you agree with that analysis? And where does that leave Spain?
I think that is part of the picture. I think in Spain, regarding the real estate sector broadly defined, there are several issues there. One, as you mentioned, is the bubble in prices, which affected certain parts of the country just as it did the United States, right? The coasts more than the center and so on and so forth. But there's also a construction bubble, meaning a construction boom during the last 6 or 7 years. In Spain, the construction business, just building not just residences or houses or commercial real estate, but also roads and bridges and railway tracks and all of that, became a very important part of the economy, to the point that about 45% of all new construction in Europe, not just residential construction, any kind of construction in all of Europe was taking place in Spain, 45%, when the Spanish economy is only maybe 15% of Europe, right? So there was a construction boom, which of course is an industry that is very labor intensive. And so when construction, slows down, then you have a lot of people actually going out of their jobs. And it's not only the direct jobs in construction; it's also the companies that make cement. It's the companies that, move around the cement and the bricks and all of the construction materials. It's all of the activities that surround construction, which is which are very, very important. And so, this is having a very, very important effect on unemployment. But having said that, there's another thing that I would like to add, which is that the Spanish economy suffers, and we can talk more about that, from a chronic problem in terms of productivity, sluggish productivity growth relative to its competitors. And this is what is really, causing trouble right now.
Those are both interesting points. When a country gets in the kind of trouble that Spain is in, if they're not in a currency union and don't have, in effect, a fixed currency, one of the ways to get out of that problem is to devalue your currency. Your exports will increase. That will help to stimulate the economy, and that more or less pulls the country out over some period. Spain can't do that. They're hamstrung because being in the European Union and with the euro, they don't have control of their currency anymore.
You're absolutely on target.
So how can they get out of this?
And proof of the importance of an orderly currency devaluation for getting out of recessions is that in Spain in the 1970s there was a recession. There was another one, of course, in the 1980s, beginning of the 1980s, and another one in the beginning of the 1990s. And at each of those points in time, Spain devalued the currency. And subsequent to that, it enjoyed relatively strong growth. So that's the way in which traditionally, the Spanish economy has gotten out of trouble. It's a beggar thy neighbor kind of way out. It's the easy way out. Having a strong currency or being part of a strong currency such as the euro also brings with it benefits, lower interest rates, a more stable macroeconomic environment. So one should not, deny the benefits. There is this problem now, and that's what I was mentioning earlier, that really the only way for the Spanish economy and for Spanish-based businesses, not just Spanish-owned businesses, but also foreign multinationals operating in Spain, the only way to remain competitive is to increase productivity, because we cannot lower prices artificially through the exchange rate.
So increasing productivity, what does that mean in practice? It sounds like deflationary policy, is that right?
Well, it means workers and managers and pretty much everybody working harder. It means doing so without smarter. And it means doing so, working harder without necessarily getting paid more. And it means investing more in education, which I think has been or continues to be the problem, or part of the problem in the country. And it essentially means also letting the market operate and see which kinds of activities should really be located in Spain and which ones shouldn't. Remember, very few people actually know that in Spain the most important export category, besides tourism, right, which is big, just the same way as it is big in Italy or in France, the second most important category is automobiles, export category. And it is the number one manufacturing good that is exported. And of course, we have we're anticipating that there will be a competitiveness problem if we don't improve our productivity, let's say in the next 3 to 5 years.
So these are all long-term solutions, it sounds like. Spain's unemployment is 19.5%. GDP fell by 3.6% in 2009. They're suffering now. Is there anything that can be done more immediately?
There are no magic bullets. The only thing that is, if you cannot devalue the currency, the only thing that you can do in the very short run is to try to reduce costs. The easiest way, of course, is by not granting wage increases, or by, even if companies, in the presence of high unemployment, if they could reduce wages, right? They could negotiate with their workers. The problem, of course, is that the labor market situation or institutions are not very flexible. So it's difficult to actually lower wages on short notice. So it's going to be a slow recovery. That is exactly the situation. Compared to the recessions in the early 90s, in the early 80s, or the one in the 1970s, this is going to be a slower recovery. And by the way, it will depend largely on the extent to which, particularly the rest of Europe recovers, because Spain's most important trading partners are France, Germany, Italy, the UK.
Switching lenses a little bit, just moving out a little bit to consider more of Europe, and you mentioned beggar thy neighbor policies. So in Europe, we've got this juggernaut exporter, Germany, which has for years been carrying a trade surplus, a big trade surplus. They're very good at creating goods and exporting them. But if Europe's going to have a balance of some sort, if one country is going to be a huge exporter, the by far biggest economy in the European Union, then other economies are going to have a trade deficit by definition, isn't that right? And if you can't balance currencies among the countries because it's essentially a fixed currency, how then can these countries balance their fiscal spending, their currencies, their interest rates? How does that work in a fixed interest rate or fixed currency environment?
Absolutely. I mean, we're going back to the issue with the euro, which is that some parts of Europe or the Eurozone are more competitive than others in the global marketplace. Now, keep in mind that the European Union as a bloc, the 27 countries, they have more or less balanced trade with the rest of the world. Okay, so it's equal exports and imports. But of course, as you just pointed out, within the European Union, some countries enjoy huge trade surpluses. That's Germany. And then the worst trade deficit, by the way, is Spain. Okay, right. So at one extreme you have Germany, and at the other you have Spain, and then the other 26 member countries, 25 member countries lie somewhere in between. So the issue is, as usual, is there will be some parts of Europe as a result of that will do better than others, and hopefully there will be adjustments. In other words, the Germans over the medium run and the long run should be paid more money for what they do because they're very good at what they're doing. And the Spaniards at the other end of the spectrum will see their standards of living come down as they hopefully restructure their economy. They will find a way in which they can compete globally, and then they will take it from there. But there's going to be right now in the next few years a big readjustment, a big restructuring in Europe, also in the United States, by the way, but for sure in Europe, as a result of the big changes that are taking place in the global economy.
Do you think this threatens the cohesiveness of the European Union?
Well, sure. Any restructuring, fundamentally? Absolutely. Any restructuring, any readjustment, causes problems. There are elections, and people will be unhappy when election time comes. Now, in Europe, as you know, the elections that matter are the national elections, and they take place at different points in time, depending on the country. Each country is on a different electoral cycle. So there will be tension and there will be frictions. And I don't think the European Union as such is going to unravel. I think that's unthinkable. But there will be frictions and there will be a lot of problems that will need to be ironed out. And certainly we're getting into a situation in which I think that the moment of truth has come, right? Because we do have other countries around the world that have become as productive and as competitive as Europe. South Korea, Taiwan, China is coming close. Even some Latin American countries are doing exceedingly well in certain industries. So the moment of truth has come. It has come for Europe, it has come for the United States. I think the first countries in the world to industrialize are facing yet again a competitive crisis, right? And they'll need to figure out what to do.
Do you think that with unemployment close to 20% in Spain, and it sounds like years of austerity of some kind, that political pressure that you talked about, or political changes and social pressures, could build to a point where there would be say, a demand within Spain to withdraw from the currency union, go back to the peseta, for example?
No, I don't think so. In fact, the support for monetary union was highest in Spain. It was actually much higher than in Germany, because in Germany a lot of people were reluctant because of, they already had a strong currency. So Spain is actually a country that, from the point of view of public opinion, is very pro-European. And I think it's just unthinkable. But it's unthinkable from another point of view, which is that you have a lot of homeowners in Spain who have a mortgage. And their mortgage is, for the in most cases, like 95% of the cases, it's a variable, adjustable interest rate. And is linked to the euro, interest rate. So there is a very, very strong reason why people would not want Spain to get out of the euro, because suddenly, their mortgage payments would go through the roof. Because once you get out of the euro, anything that is in Spain would actually, revert to a higher interest rate, right? So there's absolutely no chance that Spain by itself would want to get out of the euro.
So zero chance of that.
No, but keep in mind one very important thing, which is that the euro could depreciate itself, and that would help Spain, as long as Spanish companies export, or to the extent that Spanish companies export outside of the eurozone. Right? So if the euro does decline in value, and it has been declining in value over the last month and a half, relative to the US dollar, for example, that would help the export competitiveness of countries such as Spain, also Germany, of course, right? So there are a lot of moving pieces here. But there's one clarification also that I wanted to make about the 20% unemployment rate in Spain. It is 20%, right? And it is incredibly high. But it affects, for the most part, the young people, right? What does this mean? Well, this means that essentially among the younger age group, we're talking about 40 or 45% unemployment rate. That is where the problem is. The problem is that you could lose one generation here, right? One generation that essentially would be, outside of the labor market, making some money here or there in the informal economy, right? Because they have to live on something. But that's not the way to start your career. That's not the way to start your...
Sounds like a recipe for real political problems.
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
So what's the answer? You mentioned earlier about a mechanism. Some people were talking about a European equivalent of, say, the International Monetary Fund, a European monetary fund that would help to sort of stabilize or bail out countries like Greece that get into trouble. Is that something that is likely to fly?
Well, the European Union could obviously decide to set up such an institution. The IMF essentially intervenes in emergency situations. That is to say, when countries run out of money, they don't have reserves, they don't have the means to actually keep going, right? Keep going in the sense of living up to their commitments, financial commitments, and being able to pay for whatever things they need to import. And every country needs to import something, right? So is Greece in that situation right now? Well, it seems that it's very close to that. Of course, the IMF could bail them out, right? The interesting political or image issue right now is that, well, no European country would want, or no European country would want one of their member countries of the European Union to be bailed out by international institutions such as or global institutions such as the IMF. So there is this idea that, well, maybe the solution should be a European solution, right? But once again, we didn't think about this, or they didn't think about this 10 years ago. And now, in the midst of a crisis, they need to come up with a solution, and they find that there's no institution, right, to deal with that. Now, of course, the other way to get it done is to just get 2 or 3 countries in Europe, perhaps led by Germany, and say, we're going to bail them out. But there are a lot of political pressures within Germany, domestic political pressures, not to do so, because, as you know, the ruling coalition includes now the Liberal Party, and the Liberal Party is very much against something like this.
Mm-hmm. What is Europe likely to do? They don't want others coming in. They want to take care of their own situation. But there's a lot of differences within the countries, and
well,
how to do that.
I think let's think in terms of 2 scenarios. Well, the first scenario is that the crisis is just Greece. Okay, there's no other country. So I think probably then in the next few months, some kind of an ad hoc solution would be quietly put in place, right? The Greek problem will be dealt with. Greece is a small economy anyway. It can be easily bailed out by the rest of Europe. and that will be the end of it.
That gives some breathing space.
Exactly.
To work
so
with
it will
Spain.
be quietly put in place, without, with the public attentions, set elsewhere and so on and so forth. Scenario number 2 is that, of course, the crisis spreads, and it's not only Greece, but it's also, conceivably Ireland or Portugal, maybe some countries in Eastern Europe. Let's not forget that countries in Eastern Europe are also in dire straits, and perhaps Italy. Quite frankly, I don't see Spain, but if the crisis spreads to 5, 6, 8 countries, then maybe Spain could be part of that. So if you put yourself in the very, very pessimistic scenario, then obviously an ad hoc solution wouldn't do. It will need to be something more organized, something more institutional. It may require, the IMF's intervention after all.
So especially if there were some sort of outside shock, like a sudden jump in oil prices, for example, or
exactly. Right now we're very
sort of
vulnerable.
war
If
situation.
something else, comes our way, if there's another typhoon, right, that comes our way, then or Europe's way, then that the situation will get much, much worse, and something more drastic will need to be.
So it was interesting that earlier you put your finger on increasing productivity as ultimately the cure for this situation. But in the short run, is it going to be austerity of the kind that we were used to the IMF imposing in the 80s and 90s on countries?
Just to keep things simple, if you do not devalue the currency, which is the initial question that you posed, and that your productivity is growing at a slower pace than that of Germany or that of the other people who are in your same currency area, right? Then there is essentially, no solution. Your living standards are going to come down. It's not only that you're going to have unemployment. You may have more or less unemployment, but just in general, even those who are employed are going to be earning, less for what they do because they're not as productive, right? I mean, sooner or later, the day of reckoning kicks in, and the market, especially, the global trading system will, impose on you its conditions, which is essentially, well, if you're not as good as the others, you're not going to do as well in this economy. So that's the ultimate, consequence of this. It's not that the country, Spain in particular, or any other country is just going to, disappear. It's just that its people, its population, are going to enjoy lower standards of living. Or to put it in a different way, they're going to be declining, at least in relative terms, compared to those of other countries that are more productive. And again, the issue is Spain's productivity is growing, let's say, at 1 or 2% per year. Well, in some East Asian countries, it's growing at 4 or 5%. In Germany, it's growing, somewhere in between those two numbers. So it's not sustainable. Your standards of living will have to come down, unless, of course, you devalue. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think Spain or Greece or Italy are going to leave the Euro system.
An even different lens now. There's other countries that were in the wings wanting to get into the EU. This is the first really major crisis that the EU has had. This is the kind of crisis that critics and skeptics worried about, and it's finally here, and we'll see how things get managed. But will that affect, I mean, it seems like it's likely to affect other countries beyond Greece and so forth that are hoping to get into the EU, like Turkey, for example.
Right. So there's Turkey, and there's a few other Eastern European or former, Soviet republics who might at some point want to get in. Now, Turkey, I think, is it's an interesting situation. They've been, applying for membership for a very long time. They have everything to gain from being members of the European Union, even though they already enjoy some of the benefits because they have some free trade agreements with some of the countries. But of course, they will get a windfall from, the structural funds, from all of the subsidies, the European Union subsidies, and of course, it would give foreign investors a great deal of confidence in Greece, in Turkey, and as a result of that, then more foreign investment would pour into Turkey. But I think the current crisis should, quite frankly, in my view, if I were Turkey, should not diminish the desire to become a member of the European Union, because the benefits are, enormous. And Turkey is already quite integrated with the rest of some of the countries in the European Union, especially with Germany, right, in terms of trade. The other important thing here to keep in mind is that the European Union has actually enlarged, or let me rephrase, has entered into negotiations about enlargement during crisis. So when Spain and Portugal entered, the negotiations were taking place in the early 1980s when the European economy wasn't doing that great. Remember also Britain and Ireland and Denmark became members in the early 1970s, 1973. Okay, so the Union has welcomed new members during times of crisis in the past. So I don't think Turkey should give it up, and I certainly strongly believe that the European Union should get serious about admitting Turkey as a member.
Would it change how Turkey might want to enter? In other words, the UK has managed to escape turning to the euro. Could Turkey do something similar, at least initially?
Yes, the two things are not necessarily linked to each other. That is to say, you could become a member, as you just pointed out, and not become part of the euro currency. In fact, I would strongly, suspect that if Turkey were to become a member, let's say in 5 years from now, it would probably be, asked to, wait a few more years for euro membership, because that's a tighter, degree or extent of integration, and it requires, a number of other structural reforms. So, what Turkey needs to think about is negotiations, and because there's all sorts of details that need to be fleshed out.
So maybe you could give us one final word on where things are heading with Spain and with the European Union. What's most likely in the next critical weeks ahead?
Well, in the next weeks ahead, obviously, we're going to see quite a bit of turmoil and discussion and debate, some of it really heated in terms of what needs to be done. And once again, if there's no surprise event out there, like a spike in oil prices or whatever, I think we're going to enter into a period of 3 or 4 years during which, in Europe in general, but I think in Spain in particular, there will be very sluggish economic growth, maybe half a percentage point, maybe 1%,
so
maybe
kind
1.5%.
Muddle through.
Muddle through. It's very hard to reduce unemployment with such slow growth, and it's just going to be hard. And once again, I think we are going to be entering a period during which living standards in some parts of Europe, I think that also applies to the United States, by the way, but certainly in certain parts of Europe, including Spain, will not grow as much. And in fact, they might even shrink. So I think we are, entering a period of, not catastrophe, not, outright, decline in the economy, but certainly, a kind of a flat, profile in terms of economic growth and in terms of incomes. And people are going to wonder exactly, after 3 or 4 years of such a situation, what went wrong, and perhaps engage in some serious reforms.
We talked about external shocks. I saw that the latest trade figures for Germany for the latest period were down shockingly a large amount. I think it was over 6%. And that's already causing some worries. Does that number surprise you, and how could that affect this situation?
Well, it was surprising, and this is why there's now more concern in Europe, because Germany being the largest economy, if it's not doing as well. And for Germany, obviously the export situation is absolutely crucial. So it was surprising. And again, I think it reminds us that Germany has not resolved all of its problems, right? But once again, it's not that the country is going to, disappear from the face of the world. I mean, it is a very competitive economy, right? Even though it has its problems, they have a highly educated population, and they've surmounted, very, very important challenges before. So, there's also room for optimism. But once again, I don't think we're going to see a fast turnaround in Europe in the next 3 or 4 years. It's going to be painful. It's going to be slow. It's going to be very, very prolonged, way or road out of this recession.
Well, not to put too much on one number, but that trade number is causing worries that there could be a double-dip recession in Germany. What, do you think that's?
It could be possible, but at the very least, I think the most likely scenario is that we're going to be entering a period of just so sluggish growth that unemployment is not going to come down, and of course, if unemployment doesn't come down, then the budget deficits will remain at very high levels, right, because of subsidies, unemployment subsidies. So it's going to be tough.
Challenging times. Thanks for joining us. We're out of time. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thanks, Steve.